You think we should not wait for some more minutes until more people join, or?
We will see. Perhaps during our conversation, more people will join us. So it's we'll see how it happens here, how it evolves. Yeah.
Okay.
So the colleagues, the students, so everybody who joined us for this conversation. So it's very so we continue our DKU talks in this virtual format. I must admit it's a very unusual experience for all of us, and for the speakers, for both of us, especially for both of us as a speaker and me as a moderator of this talk. So nevertheless, I'm happy to welcome everyone to this DKU talk. So our DKU talk today is dedicated to the topic, the European Union, what future for the European Union after COVID-19. So just allow me, give me a few seconds or a few minutes to introduce this topic. So which, I mean, as a kind of background for the discussion that we will have in the next few minutes. So as everybody knows, so it's another secret. It's so everybody, not a secret, it's a wrong word expression, but we all experience this COVID-19 as a global pandemic. So we've seen it as in a matter of months. So the virus, coronavirus, which originated in China, in Wuhan, has spread around the globe. So within a matter of within months, and nowadays has become a global pandemic. It has taken the lives of more than 35 million people, and they killed more than 1 million people, according to statistics that we have from the Johns Hopkins University. And in addition to that, we know that this pandemic has created health and economic crisis around the globe. So lots of countries, so all of countries, almost all countries have taken unprecedented steps to contain the virus, including the European Union. So how effective these measures have been, and what to expect. I mean, what future holds for all these countries which took such unprecedented steps to contain the virus. We'll discuss with Professor Jakob Lempp. So we will discuss it with a focus on the European Union, because as we know, the European Union wasn't exceptional. It's also taken very exceptional steps to contain this virus, and so including the shutting the economies, closing the borders, stopping the international flights, and all these measures have meant a lot for the European Union. Has had a lot of complete implications for the European Union economies. What kind of implications will also raises during our discussion with Professor Lempp. So just give me a few seconds to introduce Professor, our guest speaker. So I'm very much honored to introduce you, Professor Dr. Jakob Lempp. So Professor Lempp is a professor of political science at the University of Applied Sciences in Rhein-Waal in Kleve, and Dean of the Faculty of Society and Economics. In the past, he's been a regular guest professor at various universities in Germany and abroad, including Austria, Kazakhstan, the Czech Republic, and Rwanda. He's a member of a number of scientific committees and societies, including the Academic Foundation for the German People, International Dialogue and Conflict Management in Vienna, and the German East Timor Society, and the German Association of Political Science and the University Teachers Associations, as well as the Working Group for Peace and Conflict Research, and in the Initiative Memorial of Eckerwald, and member of the, and he's also a member of editorial and review teams of a number scientific journals and accreditation commissions. So Professor Lempp, it's my pleasure to meet you. It's my honor to have you as a guest speaker on this conversation. So as initially we had two guest speakers for this DKU talk, and unfortunately one of the guest speakers, so Professor Sibo Jansen, has informed us this morning that he has become ill and is not able to join us for the discussion today. So I wish him well and quick recovery. So nonetheless, I'm happy that we have at least Professor Lempp for this discussion. So Professor Lempp, it's my pleasure to see you in such a virtual room for discussion. So COVID-19. Let's start. So we will. So the title of our DKU talk is "What Future for the European Union After COVID-19." But despite this title, so I thought it would be very nice if we divide or split our discussion in two parts. So we will speak about the impact of COVID-19 on the European Union right now. And then in the second part, we'll discuss what future holds for the European Union after COVID-19, hopefully. Yes. So, Professor Lempp, so let me begin with the first question. So, in your opinion, how prepared the European Union was to meet this crisis, this global pandemic crisis?
Yeah. First of all, welcome to all of you, and thanks for inviting me to this DKU talk. It's the second DKU talk that I participate in. I remember last year we had a DKU talk analyzing the results of the elections of the European Parliament last year, and we sat there together, physically sitting together. It's almost unthinkable nowadays, but this was so last year with Gabriele Stauner and others. And Sebastian also moderated this DKU talk. So it's the second time that I'm part of this format, and I'm happy to be invited here again. Your question, Sirik, is of course highly relevant. How prepared was the European Union to this pandemic? And I mean, one clear answer to that is nobody was really well prepared to this pandemic. There is no single country on earth that would now say, well, we were prepared well to this pandemic. Of course, there were crisis plans, there were scenarios. Every government has those scenarios, those policies in place, but nobody really was able to foresee the future in let's say October, November last year. But in the case of the European Union, I would say in that sense, the European Union was lucky because it was not the first place where this pandemic or this new coronavirus hit society. So when it started off in China, in Wuhan, and then in other places in China already in the end of 2019, the European countries and also the European Union had some time to think about the question, what would we do if this pandemic or if this coronavirus issue would turn into a pandemic, and if it would arrive in Europe as well. So at least in January, February, and March, then at the latest, the European Union and also the member states were able to prepare a little bit, and they actually did so already in January this year. There were meetings in the European Union and decisions taken that initially aimed at containing the spread of this new coronavirus, and well, also medical equipment was delivered to China in this early phase. But then in February, when it became clear that this would probably turn into something global, the European Union also started to think about measures, what to do in Europe itself. A joint procurement system was decided for medical equipment. That actually did not work well in the beginning, but well, improved in the coming months. And then, of course, the issue of bringing back European citizens from territories affected by COVID-19. All of that was decided already in this very initial phase in January, February, early March in the European Union, so that we can say at least some weeks were there in which the European Union and the member states, of course, we will probably talk about this complicated issue, the different levels in Europe later, where the European Union could prepare. And the issue of reacting not directly to the coronavirus, but reacting to the economic consequences of the measures against the further spreading of this coronavirus. that's a different issue. Here, I would say the European Union was much better prepared compared to, well, the preparedness in the health issue itself.
Thank you, Jakob. It's indeed very interesting. I mean, nobody was prepared for this crisis, so including the European Union. So I'm not mentioning the countries like countries in Central Asia, for example. But in terms of the European Union, because for us, for outsiders, I mean, for someone like us, I mean, like me, I mean, residing outside of the European Union, so the European Union is very complex construction. So, but we hear quite often about the internal about the debates taking place in the European Commission or in the European Council, and that countries disagree on some issues. Sometimes it takes a lot of time, I mean, to take the decisions. Yes. So, but in terms of health policy, my question is, how is it so? This question, I mean, the health policy, how the health policy is regulated in the European Union, because this is something that we cannot, I mean, look through. So it's indeed a very, I mean, so sometimes it's, so we cannot recognize it. So my question is, how the health policy is regulated?
Zarek, that's also a very relevant question, and I have to. I completely agree with your statement that the European Union has a very rather complicated political system. It's complicated for outsiders to understand. It's also complicated for people living in the European Union to understand. And there is a lot of data that shows that Europeans don't understand the political system of the European Union. So it's absolutely clear that it is a complicated structure. The basic idea is the European Union is a multi-layered political system. There is the European level, there is the level of the member states, and in addition to that, at least in some member states that are federally organized, like Germany, Belgium, Austria, and others, there is a subnational level. And the question is, which level has which competencies? Which competencies are allocated to which level of decision making? And this is complicated because it's overlapping sometimes, and most policy in most policy areas, it is not like, it's not 100% clear which level has exclusive competencies, but most policy areas overlap in their competencies, and so it's a kind of joint activity of the Union and the member states. And this is also true for health policy. The allocation of competencies between the different levels is laid down in the treaties on the European Union. There are two of those treaties constituting something like a constitution of Europe, the Treaty on the European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. And those two treaties define the institutions and also tell us something about the powers of those institutions in the specific policy areas. And well, one of those articles, Article 168 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, defines the competencies in health policy. And here the basic and general idea is that a high level of health protection all over the European Union should be there. I mean, that's the overall goal. But the main competence in health policy is still on the member states level. So member states are responsible for health policy, and the European Union only can complement national policies or encourage cooperation between member states, especially if cross-border issues are at stake. So the European Union itself is rather weak in health policy because it simply does not have the competence to make policies in that field. It's more about complementing national policies. It's more about well, moderating cooperation among member states, and therefore also if you look at the EU institutions involved in health policy, it's the intergovernmental institutions. It's the Council, it's the European Council. It is not so much the European Parliament. The treaty says in health policy, the European Parliament shall be kept fully informed, which means like has nothing to say in the field of health policy. There are some minor exceptions, some small issue areas where the European Union can act independently with the normal legislative procedure, but those are very well clearly defined small exceptions, like setting minimum standards for the quality of medical equipment, or measures against the abuse of alcohol and tobacco, or things like that. The big decisions needed in the field of health policy when it comes to fighting COVID-19 have to be taken on the member states level and not on the European level. There is maybe one last point that I want to make here, and that is the European, there is one body in the European Union that is responsible for fighting diseases, and this is this body is called ECDC. It's a European body mainly responsible for tracking or for collecting statistics on this pandemic as well. So all the data that we have on the spread of the coronavirus in Europe is collected by a body that belongs to the European Union, which is good because then we can make sure that the statistics are the same in every member state a little bit. But that's another exception. The general answer is the member states are responsible, not the EU.
Professor Lempp, you mentioned this European ECDC. Its abbreviation stands for European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. So we in Central Asia were more accustomed to hear about the CDC in the United States, and here quite often, here quite often the reports to the government or to the public, etc. This ECDC is something. Is it an institution of the European Union that you hear quite often? Is it? Does it come often in use? Or does it publish any reports on its website, or makes the reports public to all European citizens, that you are aware of the number of people infected in other countries?
Very good question. The ECDC is very transparent. It publishes its reports in the internet. There are daily reports on the development of the disease with all the statistics that you can think of. So it is transparent. It is publishing everything, but still, also, these statistics are of course, the basis for decisions of governments in the member states and also for the European Union institutions. But you are completely right. People, normal citizens, don't really know about this body. So it's not a well-known institution in Europe. If you ask people in Europe where do they have their data from, they would probably say, well, if they say anything, they would refer to the Johns Hopkins University in the US or to other sources of data. So it is a little bit similar to all the other EU institutions. They try to be known, but they are not well known among Europeans.
And is there any hierarchy of institutions in the European Union? So we have this ECDC, for example, on the level on the EU level, but we have also this Robert Koch Institute in Germany. Does it listen to ECDC? Do they cooperate, or how it looks like?
They cooperate. There are these institutions responsible for health issues, for pandemics, for statistics in every member state of the European Union. And they closely work together with the ECDC, because the data is rather collected by the ECDC from the national institutions responsible for collecting data on COVID-19. They do not really collect the data themselves by individual surveys or statistics. So this is the idea is it's a small institution. It's not one of those huge institutions that we also have in the European Union. It's rather a small thing that brings together statistics from sources that come from the member states, rather than being in the driving seat of fighting this pandemic.
Thank you. So, Professor, and perhaps we'll come back to this question. So, in the second part of our discussion, to the role of ECDC, that ECDC should play in future, or perhaps we'll come back to this question in the second part of our discussion. But now I would like to ask you a question. So, you mentioned that the health policy is a matter of member states, of the nation state, of member state of the European Union. So, it's also, I mean, in our region, it's also, I mean, we have the same situation. So, the health policy is a matter of the So we have this Eurasian Economic Union, but the health policy is still something that belongs to the member states, but not governed on the level of the European Economic, of the Eurasian Economic Union. But in terms of in the European Union, so having said that the health policy is a matter of the member states. So if I look at the statistics of the number of people infected in the European Union, and also if I look at the statistic of the number of people who died because of COVID-19, so we have different numbers. I mean, across the European Union. So I think the hardest hit country is Italy, or no, is UK. Is UK followed by Spain, Italy, etc., etc. As for Germany, so my statistics, if it's not wrong, my statistics for Germany is. So I will mention briefly. So United Kingdom, 515,000 people have died. Oh, sorry, what I'm saying.
Cases, number of cases being known as infected.
Yeah. So, but number of people who died in the UK, for example. So this is the hardest hit country in the European Union. So we have 42,000. So more than 42,000 people who died in the United Kingdom, followed by Italy, 36,000, France, 32,000. Spain 32, etc., etc. And Germany is, so as for Germany, we have 9,546 people who died in Germany. So we see these huge differences in terms of the number of people who died of COVID-19. Why is this difference? I mean, why is the number of deaths so different across the countries, also between the countries in the European Union? Is it because they have different health standards, or is it because, I don't know, because of what?
Yeah. Also, that is a very relevant and highly interesting question. And also here the answer is we don't know yet completely. There are hypotheses why this is the case, and I can say something about these guesses that may explain these differences. But first of all, you are completely right. The numbers are extremely different in the different EU member states, and also in other European countries. And as you mentioned, there are countries that are hit extremely badly, like Spain and Belgium and the UK and Italy, but also Sweden and France. If you mentioned some absolute numbers, if we put these absolute numbers of people having died somehow connected to COVID-19 to the populations of those countries, we can see the differences are even bigger, with countries like Sweden, Italy, France, the United Kingdom, Spain and Belgium with 50, 60, 70, even 80 or 90 people died due to or in relation to COVID-19 per 100,000 inhabitants. And in other countries like Latvia, Cyprus, Lithuania, Greece, this number is only 1 or 2 or 3 per 100,000. So 80 times more people died in Belgium in relation to COVID-19 than in Slovakia. since the start of the pandemic in Europe in March this year. So these are huge differences, and of course the question is why? What explains these huge differences? And a part of the explanation is certainly luck. Some countries were simply lucky because nobody who was infected went to these countries in these initial phases. Those events, some of those events can be traced back quite well. In Ischgl, for example, in Austria, there was one event that contributed to spreading the virus all over Europe, but well, not all over Europe, but to the places where the people who participated in these events actually came from. So a part of the explanation is simply bad luck for some of those countries. But of course, there are other factors as well. The timing, for example. Italy was hit first in Europe and did not have the time to prepare properly in its health system, in the hospitals, because it simply was so quick. And Germany came later, so Germany had some more weeks time to prepare for this disease, and therefore simply the health system was better prepared in Germany than it was in Italy, not because it is generally better, but because it had more time to prepare. So timing does play a very big role. But of course also the health system. So basically it comes down to the number of places in intensive care per capita. And this number is relatively high in Germany and lower, for example, in Spain or in the UK. So of course, if you use this as an indicator for the quality of the health system, then you could also argue the quality of the health system is part of the explanation. Testing and tracking is important. I mean, the testing and tracking system in place in Germany is quite well organized. There are problems with that as well. But the idea in Germany is to really track everybody who is known to be infected with this new coronavirus, and then put all the people who met that person into quarantine for 2 weeks. This system does not work perfectly, but it works more or less okay in Germany. And in other places, especially in the UK, it does not work properly. In the UK, we had only some days ago, we had that scandal about 20,000 people known to be infected with the coronavirus, and the authorities simply lost their data for a certain while. So this, of course, also explains why the virus could spread quicker, especially in that second wave that we have now in countries like the UK. Culture may be an explanatory factor. I mean, why was Spain and Italy and some southern European countries hit so hard? Some commentators guessed. Again, it's hypotheses. We don't know yet, but one guess is that in those countries where the average distance between people that is considered to be normal is relatively close compared to, say, Finland, where people feel comfortable if they are 4 meters away from each other. That, of course, may also explain why it spread so quickly in countries like Spain, especially, and Italy. Simply, the density of population is different. Belgium, for example, is a densely populated country, and Finland is not. So the chance to meet other people, the crowds in public transport, for example, is different in Belgium compared to Finland. For sure, that makes a difference. And last not least, I mean, this pandemic proved again that government policies do make a difference, and government policies or governments reacted differently to this pandemic in the different European countries. I mean, this is quite clear that Sweden, for example, had a completely different policy in place if then for example Italy or Spain. Italy and Spain were very strict in their measures and also controlling the lockdown and closing everything already quite early in this phase, whereas Sweden engaged in a different policy, a more liberal policy, and hoping that people would think themselves instead of being regulated by the government. These policies do make a difference, that's quite clear. I think that the very liberal Swedish policy also explains the relatively high numbers that we have in Sweden, because that's also a country with a very high incidence of COVID-19 related deaths in the European Union. All these factors probably explain these differences, but we will know for sure in, I would say, 10 years when we have the data and really can do more analyses. Until now, it's guesses, not more.
Perhaps there's another, in preparation for this DKU talk, I had a discussion with a colleague of mine about this question. So why such differences in the number of deaths? And his suggestion was, his answer was, perhaps it's because of vaccination that the peoples in Eastern Europe had against the tuberculosis in comparison with the people in the Western European countries. So, and indeed, if you look at the numbers of people who died in countries like Croatia, on 300 people, or in Bulgaria, 854 people, Hungary, 853 people. So they're not. So I'm not sure if this evidence is anecdotal, or does it hold any proof? But may I follow up on your last statement, Professor Lempp? So you mentioned perhaps the culture is also important. Perhaps the way how the countries are governed, etc. What kind of institutions they have in place, responsible for handling this crisis. Can I follow up on this issue? So indeed, so what we see in the European Union is that the countries that try to handle this crisis in a different way. So we have Sweden having in place quite a liberal approach towards COVID-19 without any lockdowns, etc. And we have Spain or Italy, which implement quite hard measures, shut down the economies, etc., etc. Why we have such differences in place? Why the institutions handle this question, this crisis differently? So I'm not sure. Do the people in Sweden? So it's my guess. So the people in Sweden are more liberal. They would not like it if the government imposes hard measures against them. They would resist it. So, and this might be different in Italy or Spain, which has this experience with autocratic rule. Is it because of that? Or is it still anecdotal?
It's some commentators argued that in Sweden, the readiness to follow a recommendation is relatively high. So it's enough for the government to recommend something. Whereas in other countries, if the government recommends something, people think, okay, it's not forbidden, we do it still. It's not recommended to party, but let's party because it's legal. Whereas in Sweden, people might follow recommendations already, and that might explain why the legal instruments in place in Sweden are more liberal. Generally, I would say the possibilities to react to this pandemic for countries are, either the government downplays the danger of this virus and this pandemic. That's what we see in the US, for example. That's the Donald Trump's policy, to downplay the danger of that pandemic. That's also something that we see in European countries. We saw it in the UK in the beginning with Boris Johnson's policy in the beginning. That changed after a while when it was no longer possible to downplay the danger. but we see it still in countries like Belarus, for example. Alexander Lukashenko is still in April or May said, well, we don't have COVID here in Belarus. That's nothing that the people in Belarus have. Although I personally know some people from Belarus, and they said the situation in the hospitals is very different. There is COVID-19 in Belarus, but the government tries to play it down. That's one reaction. And another reaction would be to take it serious and still react differently. More liberal, very liberal reactions like the ones we had in place in Sweden. More strict reactions with lockdowns that we had in many other countries in the European Union, or, and that's probably what more populist governments use as an instrument, really rather illiberal reactions with excessive executive powers that actually change the power relationship in the political system, with a transformation of power away from parliaments and to the governments, to a degree that some political scientists even argue that countries like Poland or Hungary, governed by right-wing populist governments, use this pandemic to gain more power for the executive, for the government, and to take powers from the parliament. So that's the different possibilities governments can react to this pandemic, and we had all three reactions, or all and everything between that in the different European countries. You could criticize that, of course, because does it make sense to react differently to this pandemic? You could also argue, yeah, maybe that's a good thing to do, because I mean, the European Union was hit to a different degree. Member states were hit differently by this pandemic, so it maybe makes sense to react differently to this pandemic in different political systems. That's also the very idea of the European Union, is the idea of subsidiarity. So solve problems on the lowest level that is actually able to solve a problem. And that is why some people argue, well, we do not need one single common European reaction to this pandemic all over Europe, because the situation is different in different places.
Thank you much, Professor Lempp. So you mentioned this right-wing populist parties in Hungary or in Poland. And do you think this delegation of power to the executive was a temporary measure for the time being, or for the time of COVID-19, or is it something which, I mean, will have a lasting effect on the political systems in Hungary and Poland?
I mean, in every government or in every political system, in every country in Europe, those measures were claimed to be temporal. And I hope that they are temporal. But there is fear that some governments may, after a while, think, well, it's easier to govern. We like this situation with powers transferred from the parliament to the government, with limited control functions of the parliaments. And so the fear is that people like Viktor Orban, for example, or the Kaczynski party in Poland, well, keep some of those powers. I'm very sure that this pandemic will change the power relationship among the institutions in many countries all over the world, also in some of the European countries. On the other hand, what we can also observe is that this pandemic is difficult for populist parties and populist governments, because populist governments in the end are evaluated by the people also in the sense that that people want their problems to be solved. And if this pandemic proves that populist governments are not good in solving problems, then it might become a problem for those governments as well. What is very clear is that populism has not killed COVID-19. But COVID-19 probably will also not kill populism. It's a difficult relationship. When we talk about populist governments or populist parties and COVID-19, we can also see this effect that the political agenda has changed dramatically due to this pandemic. In the end of 2019, the major topics on the political agenda in Europe were climate change and migration. Now it's health policy and fighting the economic consequences of the lockdown. And most of those right-wing populist movements in Europe, at least, they focus very much on the issue of migration. And this issue seems to be lower on the agenda of people among Europe, because they think that there are more urgent problems at the moment, health issues and economic issues. And so I also think that we can observe already now that the support for populist movements in Europe decreases due to COVID-19, simply because the political agenda has changed.
Yeah. Can I follow up on this statement, Professor Lempp? So I'm really interested in the public opinion. So what does the public think about the way how the governments handle the crisis? For example, if you speak about, so if you take Germany as an example, well, you know, the Angela Merkel has a higher reputation inside the country and worldwide. But you as a German citizen, what do you think about the way how your government has handled this crisis? Is that true?
Well,
that, but I'm saying that the Germans, most Germans like the way the Angela Merkel government had handled this crisis.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are many public opinion surveys that are very clear in measuring this widespread support for Angela Merkel's government and her way of handling the crisis. Well, one reason for that is that the numbers are relatively low in Germany compared to other countries in Europe. So Germany was hit, but it was not hit as badly as other countries in Europe were hit, UK especially, or Spain and Italy, or Belgium. And that is why specifically in Germany, the reputation of the support for the government increased, which implies also that the support for the parties, the coalition that constitutes the German government at the moment, the Christian Democratic Party and the Social Democratic Party, the support for those parties has increased, I would say, due to the relatively well-recognized handling of the COVID crisis. Generally, crises are the times for the governments and for the political parties that support the government in the parliament. And that is also what we can see in most European countries. If the government does an okay job in handling the crisis, everywhere the support for the government increases and the support for opposition parties decreases. And we could see that very clearly in Germany. Parties like the right-wing populist party AfD lost support, but also the Green Party lost support, and the CDU, the party of Angela Merkel, won support, which is of course extremely relevant because we have elections in Germany next year. And so it might even impact on the question who will govern Germany after Angela Merkel. In other countries, it's different. I mean, in those countries where the government had problems in handling the crisis, support for the government decreases. We see that in the US at the moment in the presidential election. I mean, that's quite obvious that Donald Trump lost support due to his chaotic handling of the crisis, due to his downplay of the danger of that crisis. There is huge potential for governments and political parties in power in such crises, because crises are good for governments who function well and bad for governments who do not function well. And your question about the numbers, it's a relatively stable share of around 80% of the Germans answer yes to the question, do you think that the German government handles this crisis well? So 80% support for the government, that's a very high number, and that's also due to this shift of the political agenda away from topics where the government in Germany has maybe not such a good reputation as mainly in the two big issues of last year: climate change and migration.
I don't remember where I read the statement, but there is one evidence which says that Germany has performed well because of Angela Merkel. How to say it? So the gender does matter. I mean, the gender of a person who is in the government, I mean, does matter. I mean, did play a role. I mean, in terms of handling this crisis. So, which is why we see low number of deaths in Germany, in Europe, or we see low number of deaths in New Zealand, for example. Yes. So, but let's return to the European Union. So, I mean. Professor Lempp. So my next question is, what is your opinion? I mean, in your opinion, how's did European Union act as one actor, or did the contradictions between the national and transnational institutions play a role in the European Union when handling this crisis? So did the European Union meet this crisis as one actor, or as or did the contradictions play a role? Yeah.
Again,
because I have to give an example, I have a report from Reuters, so from March 4 this year, which says that Germany bans export of medical protection gear due to coronavirus to other Eastern European countries. I mean, so, and reports like that, I mean, we also see such reports from France, for example. So France has closed its borders, had stopped its export of personal protection equipment to other countries, to other member states of the European Union. I mean, what we have today, I mean, is it still in place? I mean, such handling of crisis, so that member states close the borders, put the bans on the export of the medical equipment, or did it stop? I mean, at some point, do they cooperate more right now?
Yes, this is absolutely the case. In the initial phase, there was not much cooperation, and we had these. I mean, I live close to the French border. So I live in the southwest of Germany, very close to the French border, very close to the Swiss border. And in March, when the whole thing started off in Germany, there were these cases where borders were closed, not only for people, but also for medical equipment. I remember the situation when the German government ruled initiated an export ban for these masks when there was a scarcity of masks in the beginning of this crisis. And that, of course, shows that in this initial phase, there was not much cooperation. There was no European spirit. And everybody saw that it was so obvious because, I mean, cars transporting masks to Italy in March, when Italy was hit so badly and Germany was not at that time, were stopped at the German-Swiss border, 30 kilometers from my hometown, and were forbidden to transport these masks to Italy. I mean, that was in the media, and that was what everybody saw. And so it was obvious to all Europeans, and that was also dominating the newspaper articles, that the question, where is Europe? Where is solidarity among European member states in that phase? But it has changed. It has changed after a while. Both the solidarity and the cooperation among member states, and also the European Union itself, the European Commission, most importantly, took the initiative to change that situation. Borders are open again. Borders were opened some weeks after closing the borders within the European Union. Now it's possible, it's legal to travel freely around the European Union again. There are no border checks in most borders. And of course, local situations may be handled differently. But this general situation of everybody working for the national interest rather than to see the whole European picture, this situation is over. So I would say in the initial phase of the pandemic in Europe, the member states worked even against each other, but this situation was overcome after some weeks, and now the situation is different, and there is much more coordination and cooperation and solidarity now, and much more also joint action, both in the health sector, but even more so in the European reaction that aims at overcoming the economic consequences of this pandemic. Here in that field, we can really see a revolution of European policy. But we may talk about this issue probably later on in this discussion.
Good. That's very interesting. So indeed, so we've been quite surprised, to hear that some European member states, close the borders and all the, but in general, so in general terms, so what we see right now, so most countries, perhaps at least initially, they reacted in a very, how to say, in a very conservative way, if I may say.
Nationalistic approaches,
ways.
yes.
Yes, the United States has, for example, has put up, the global package of remdesivir, which was quite, yes, one of the effective, treatments against COVID-19. But so, and most countries were wondering why they're doing that like that. But we also see it. We also saw it in the European Union. But now, so I'm happy to hear that. So now we have more solidarity inside the European Union, which is quite good. So perhaps with this note, we come to our second part of our discussion, Professor Lempp. But before we go over to the second part, so I would like to ask the audience, perhaps there are some questions from our audience. So we have 22 people altogether joining us. That's perhaps.
Yeah, I see that there are some questions also in our Zoom group chat.
Which policy do you agree with? With which policy do you agree more, Professor Lempp? So there's a question from Alana Ashim, the liberal one or the government restricting one? So what is your opinion?
Well, I would say it depends on the situation, the cultural situation, as I have explained before. In some countries, it's simply more, a more liberal approach simply fits more the expectation of the people. So probably in countries like Sweden, where people are used to follow recommendations already, a very strict policy would have, well, created more problems rather than solve problems. So some argue whether a liberal or a more strict policy fighting the spread of the coronavirus is effective or not depends on the political culture in the different countries. So I personally think a policy is good if it is effective and if it is accepted by the people, and that differs in different political cultures. So, well, in Germany, we had a mixture of both. The German policy was less strict, or the lockdown was less strict than in Spain or Italy. It was much stricter than it was in Sweden, which is probably because also the political culture in Germany is a little bit between the Swedish one and the Spanish one. Germany is in the center of Europe, so also culturally it is a little bit the middle ground, and well, differs from both. And so I personally think that the way the German government reacted to this crisis was relatively effective, and that can also be proven by numbers. And that was a middle way between a very liberal and a very strict policy.
Interesting. So thanks, Professor.
But I also have to say I have 4 children. And in Germany, schools were closed. So it was not that the German policy was purely based on recommendations. I have 4 children. I had to work at home from home office with 4 children being at home. I had to take care of them because my wife, she works in public authority, so she had to go to work outside home. I was at home with 4 children, one of them being 4 years old. I mean, it was a disaster for my kids. It was a disaster for me. I suffered from these measures personally. So it's not that Germany had a extremely liberal recommendation-based policy. It was strict here as well. It was even stricter in Italy and Spain, where people were not allowed to leave their flat, their home, for months. Even children had to stay inside for several months. I mean, that was much stricter than in Germany. Yeah.
It's quite challenging. I mean, yeah, Sebastian, go ahead.
I have 2 questions. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure, Jakob, to have you here virtually at least, and I'm looking forward to meet you next year in person, and then we will be hiking again.
Yes, that would be great. So let's hope for this situation to change in the coming 12 months.
Yeah. It's a very topical issue, and thanks for organizing this event, Serik, and thanks, Jakob, for being with us virtually. I have 2 questions pointing to the future, and I'm not sure if I should pose them at the end of the discussion or they might be leading over to the second part. I'm not sure. If you interrupt me, push me till the end, that's okay, but I could pose questions now.
Serik is the boss, so he has to decide.
Yes,
Serik is the boss.
Takes a lead.
Okay, so my first question is about sort of this intergovernmental supranational thing that you mentioned. I mean, asked about the different levels of decision-making in the European Union, and you pointed out that decision-making in this health issue area is relatively intergovernmental at the moment. And my question is, how do you see the European Union, let's say in 5 years from now, and regarding this health issue, and the background of this question is there might be some sort of functional pressure on the European Union on taking over sort of responsibilities, authorities that are at the moment, let's say, predominantly being taken over by the member states, but that might be taken over, there might be something that is usually called as supranationalization. So a move from sort of intergovernmental structures to more supranational structures. And of course, this is no binary thing. This is not that it's either intergovernmental or supranational, but there might be something like a functional pressure now on the European Union, and member states now, given this crisis, this corona crisis, increasingly being ready to shift responsibilities, to give responsibilities to the usual suspects, the European Commission, the supranational body. And my question to you is, how do you see the EU 5 years from now, let's say 5 or, well, 10 years would be too long probably, but 5 years from now in terms of this health issue? And the second question is about sort of related issue areas. And you mentioned that in the beginning as well, the economic consequences of the corona crisis. And I think this figure wasn't mentioned, and I don't know the figure myself by heart, but this economic package to sort of fight the corona crisis is
yes.
a huge
750 billion.
It's several 500 billions of euros, an unbelievable amount. And the related question is, to what extent, and this is probably like a rhetorical question that has to be answered in the affirmative, but still I want to pose it, is sort of the corona crisis a catalyst towards perhaps a debt union, something like that, where in the future, even apart from corona issues, the European Union member states might get used to sort of supporting allegedly poorer states to a much greater extent than has been the case in the past.
Yeah. If I may follow up on this question, yeah, Professor Lempp.
Yeah.
So this 750 billion euro that the European Union has provided as a recovery package to the European member states, was it a grant or was it a loan?
Okay, I tried to answer all these questions jointly, and hereby I think we already are in the second part then of our discussion, because it points to the future, obviously. Thank you, Sebastian, for your two questions, and Serik also for the question regarding this next generation EU package, the 750 billion euros. Maybe, Sebastian, I start with your question, the outlook on the European Union in 2025. I'm very sure that this pandemic already now has changed the European Union and will sustainably change the European Union clearly in the coming years as well. But specifically in the health sector, I'm quite sure that it will not change so much. In the health sector, probably not, because the competencies in health policy is clearly written down in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. I mentioned Article 168 before, and changing the treaties through intergovernmental conferences, through a unanimous decision of all member states, through a ratification by referenda in some member states, all of that, I doubt whether this will happen. So I think the European Union will be transformed through this pandemic, but I think it will be transformed not on the level of the treaties, but on the level on the practical handling of things. So in health issues, I guess, my guess is that not much will change. However, you mentioned this process of functional pressure also on other policy areas. And here I see a huge issue, because we already now can observe this spillover from one topic area, health, to another topic area, budget policy, climate policy, traditional own resources are changed. The European Union will be able to tax products itself directly. Those are all huge revolutions that were unthinkable some years ago, and they are now decided already and will most likely be in place in some years. So there is a process of supranationalization, both in terms of spill over from one topic area to another, and also in terms of who actually handles those issues. But you are completely right. Even in the very few competencies that the European Union has at the moment already in health policy, even there, it's a purely intergovernmental issue. Decisions can be taken by the Council and not by the European Parliament. The European Parliament does not play a major role in health policy. So that is why I guess, and if the European Parliament wanted to have bigger, well, more powers in that policy area, a treaty change would be needed, and this is something that I'm very pessimistic about. The situation looks completely different when when we talk about the fight against the economic consequences of the lockdown. Here we saw dramatic changes, and that leads me to your second and Serik's question about this recovery plan for Europe and this next generation EU package. So in that sense, this pandemic was a catalyst. Yes, and of course the answer is in the affirmative. Yes, the pandemic was a catalyst, and it will bring about many changes in that field. And I can shortly give you an overview on what the European Union decided in that field of fighting the economic consequences. I mean, as we have seen in the beginning, there was not much talk about these issues, but already in May, the European Commission proposed this huge package. They called it Recovery Plan for Europe. This Recovery Plan for Europe is based on two pillars. One pillar is the normal 7 years multi-annual framework, the financial framework that is basically a plan for the budget, the annual budget of the European Union for the coming 7 years, from 2021 to 2027. And this multi-annual financial framework was already prepared and discussed before we had COVID-19, but COVID-19 increased simply the scope of this multi-annual financial framework, and now it's 1,000 billion euros in that multi-annual financial framework for the coming 7 years. So that's simply the European Union will be able to spend more money in its normal annual budget in the coming 7 years. And the second pillar of this recovery plan for Europe is something that has never been there before, something unique, something that happened for the first time in the history of the European Union, and that is this 750 billion euro package that the European Commission calls Next Generation EU. That is money partly taken from the financial market. So the European Union is able to use debt to finance and to invest in the member states. That was never so before, and it is so. It will be so in the future. And this money will be used to support the member states to recover economically from the consequences of the lockdown. It will be used for investment in the member states, in key sectors like the tech sector, the IT sector, climate change, and things like that. And it will be 2/3 out of these 750 billion euros will be grants that the member states hit the most by this pandemic will not have to repay, and 1/3 will be loans that the member states have to pay back to the European Union. So this is really something new, because for the first time the European Union will be able to use money not given to the European Union by the member states or through the traditional owned resources, but taken money from the financial markets. The EU can be a debt. Sebastian, you said you used the word of a debt union, but I have to add to this that there is also a plan how to repay that debt. The plan is to repay this debt through new sources of income for the European Union. And that is also something that will sustainably change the European Union, because the ideas about how to repay this debt are already now very, very detailed. For example, there is a plan for a European Union tax on non-recyclable plastics. I mean, this shows two things. First of all, for the first time in history, there is a European Union tax. Until now, taxes are on the member states level only. There is some harmonization of the tax rate and so on among the member states, but taxes are member states' taxes. And in the future, there will be probably this tax on non-recyclable plastic that directly goes to the European Union. And the second issue here is that the European Commission tried to link this fight against the economic situation caused by the lockdown with the issue of climate change. And this link can be seen, for example, in this tax on non-recyclable plastic, but it also can be seen in the other ideas about how to repay that debt through a carbon levy, through a new EU emissions trading system, and so on. There are other ideas as well. Maybe there will be a financial transaction tax, a European financial transaction tax. That's not decided yet, but that's another idea that is rather old. We discuss about that issue for years now, but maybe the pandemic will also be a catalyst in that sense. So to sum that up, yes, this pandemic will be a catalyst for Europe for further steps of supranationalization, not so much in the health sector, very much in the way how the European Union is financed, new own resources, EU taxes, and it is a revolution in the sense that the Commission tried to link this topic with the overall topic of fighting climate change. I mean, that is also something that Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, had on her agenda when she was elected President of the European Commission. The new Green Deal, the making Europe greener, fighting climate change, that's very high on her political agenda. And now she uses this pandemic to invest more money in fighting climate change in the future. Of course, using that money also to invest money in the member states' economies that are hit most by this pandemic. Sorry, now I was talking quite a long time, but I tried to answer both of Sebastian's questions.
Many thanks.
It was also a very big question from Sebastian. We have one more question from Rosa Badaria. Hello, everyone. I have one question. How do you think the quarantine situation has affected people's mental health? Do you have any response to that question?
Acoustically, I couldn't hear what you say. Would you say it again?
How do you think, Jakob, how do you think the quarantine situation has affected people's mental health? Do you have any answer to this question?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about consequences of this crisis, we actually tend to forget to talk about these issues. I mean, everybody is talking about the economic consequences of the lockdown. Everybody is talking about the health issues, but of course, this pandemic or the lockdown then has had consequences in other fields as well. You mentioned the psychological effects of being in your flat for months. That was the case in Spain and Italy, and in some countries it comes again with the second wave. We are almost there again in many places in France, for example. My brother, he's a professor for logic in Paris. Paris is hit very horribly in this second wave of the pandemic at the moment, and we have a lockdown in Paris again. People are allowed to leave their home only to go to work or to buy stuff. That's it. So we have these lockdown situations still today in place in some cities, and this does have an effect on people. I mean, children didn't go to school for months in some places. Children still do not go to schools in some places, and even now, when most children go to school again, schools are closed if there is one single case of a coronavirus infection. This has effects on how children get educated in Europe. This has an effect on the social network for children. Also, social distancing. I mean, what we mean by using that word is physical distancing, hoping that physical distance does not lead to social distance, actually. But after months of physical distance, there might be social distance, emotional distance as well for many people. And I mean, we don't have the statistics yet, but I mean, there are many educated guesses about increasing numbers of suicides, increasing numbers of depression and other I mean, psychological issues. All of that is affected by this pandemic. It has also positive effects in some areas. I mean, we were talking about climate change. I would have used the airplane to come to Almaty for this DKU talk or for my lecture on the European Union 2 weeks ago, and now I use Zoom or WebEx instead of the airplane, which causes less emissions. I mean, there are also maybe positive effects on the patterns of work that we have. The jump in digitalization that can be observed in many areas is also affected by COVID. So I would be very cautious in already now, well, summing up all those positive and negative effects and to come to a conclusion how this will change the world. It will change the world, that's for sure. To the better or to the worse remains to be seen. But of course, at the heart of the whole issue is the people dying from COVID. We had only in Europe, there were 200,000 people who died somehow linked to COVID-19. There are 2.5 million people who were infected or whose infections are known. I mean, that's the primary effect. These secondary effects, well, are there, but can be analyzed in 10 years probably.
I have one question. Can I?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good day, Herr Lempp. Maybe must I introduce myself? My name is Didar. I am a student of DKU Faculty International Relationship. And I have one question about the immigration. It is maybe a heavy topic for European Union. And how do you think what will situation with illegal or legal immigration in the European Union after 5 years? Will the number of immigrants higher or lower? So what will be? Thank you for answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the future. Even professors do not know the future, but I can try to say something about that as well. What we can already now observe and what we can see in the numbers is that the numbers of refugees and migrants coming to Europe goes down since 2015. That was the peak, and since then numbers went down. Whether this has to do with coronavirus or COVID-19 or the lockdown or other reasons, well, we can speculate about that, but statistics show numbers of migrants to Europe come down, and did come down rapidly also this during this pandemic. Whether they will go up again afterwards remains to be seen. I mean, the reasons for migration are diverse. Many people come from Syria, many people come from Afghanistan, many people come from Eritrea, where there is quite the situation is quite clear. So those people are mostly can stay in Europe because they have a legitimate basis for asking for asylum. Others come for economic reasons that may be affected by this lockdown, because of course I mean the European economy crashed. We don't know yet, but 2020 will probably be a GDP growth of minus 10% in Europe, minus 10%. So maybe economic reasons to migrate to Europe will be less present due to this economic consequences of and Europe will be hit even more than the global economic effects. There are guesses that the GDP growth globally in 2020 will be minus 5%. In the European Union, it will be probably something around minus 8%. And in some of those countries, like the UK especially, and Italy and France, where that were most hit by the coronavirus, it will be even worse, minus 10% or so. Of course, or most people hope and guess that this will change in 2021, but nobody knows. And of course, the economic situation in Europe will also impact on the number of people who come to Europe for economic reasons. Yeah, that's already the case. I also see that there was another question related to the refugee issue in the chat. I mean, another issue that brings together this topic of the pandemic with the topic of refugees is the situation for those refugees in those Greek camps where most of those refugees actually live at the moment, or many people who migrate to Europe end up in Greece, in some of those camps being situated on the islands. The biggest one of those was the case of Moria, a huge camp with horrible situation for people living there. That probably you have followed the news. It burned down some weeks ago, and the question here is, of course, questions of hygiene, of handling COVID-19 among those refugees. That simply we don't know because there is not much data about that, and the situation for those people is, of course, a very bad situation. Yeah, as I said before, migration at the moment is not on the top of the political agenda in Europe. But you are completely right. My personal opinion on that is that the migration issue cannot be solved on a member states basis. This is really a question that needs to be solved in the European Union, but migration is a little bit like health. The competencies for migration, for asylum, for citizenship questions are on the member states level and not on the European level. So here as well, it's about intergovernmentally coordinating national policies, and it's not so much about one European policy.
Jakob, I think we've got another question which concerns the future of the European Union. It's about the standing of the European Union as a foreign actor, especially so in relation to China. So what do you think? So how the relationship between the European Union and China will look like in future? It's a question from Victoria Shu.
What do you think? Has the situation changed into a political situation somehow radically, possibly in relation to countries, maybe between China and other countries? How the situation influenced the opinion of European people? Maybe people somehow speak out negatively towards the inhabitants of China. I disagree, but many believe that it is they who are to blame for the situation? Well, I mean, if we look at the numbers in China, they look surprisingly good. I mean, it was a bad situation in Wuhan in the beginning. I think it is quite clear that Wuhan may also be the origin of that new variant of the coronavirus. What I did not hear in Europe is what we heard from the USA quite a lot, from Donald Trump quite a lot, blaming China somehow, or blaming the Chinese who eat strange stuff and therefore, I don't know, created this coronavirus, or even deliberately created this virus to damage the US economy or so. You can hear that quite a lot in the US. You don't hear that so much in Europe. I mean, it is quite obvious the origin of this new variant of the virus was in China, but blaming China doesn't help to handle the problem. And therefore, this is probably what most Europeans think about that. Whether it will change the global power relationship between countries, that also remains to be seen. I think if this pandemic proves to be a catalyst in supranationalizing Europe one step further, in economic respects, maybe in the end eventually also in political, even defense, military respects, then it might also have an impact on the global situation. But well, the path from health to economy to foreign policy, and in the end to defense, with the overall goal of having one single European army and the European Union being one single powerful actor in this world system of world powers. Well, that's a very long path, and maybe we will end up there, but not in the next 3, 4, 5 years, maybe in 30 years or so, because the member states of the European Union are very reluctant in transferring sovereignty in the field of defense to the European Union. And not even the COVID-19 pandemic will, that's my guess, will be effective in motivating member states to do that. So I doubt that. The European Union will continue to struggle to be perceived as one single actor on the global scale, because simply France doesn't really want to hand over its nuclear bombs, its atomic bomb to the European Commission. That will probably not happen.
What is the opinion of Europeans about this question? I mean, do Europeans want the European Union become more stronger? Because I read one article in the Guardian from 24th of June, which says that Europeans say EU was irrelevant during pandemic, and most agree. So 68% agree that EU must be more stronger, must become more stronger. Is it what you feel in Germany?
I mean, in Germany, I mean, these public opinion polls also, the European Union tracks public opinion on the European Union quite effectively. There is the Eurobarometer providing topical and up-to-date statistical data on this on a frequent basis every 6 months. And what we can see already before the pandemic is that support for the European idea is increasing again. There was a low in 2015 due to the migration situation and also the handling of the migration situation, where it also became obvious that there is no European solidarity. Some EU member states simply said, migration, that's not our problem. We do not take anybody because those people are Muslims and our Hungarian society is Christian, so they don't fit together and we don't take these people. So also in the field of migration, there was a low in the support of the European Union, because everybody saw very clearly that there is no joint action in a topic that was highly relevant for everybody. And in the beginning of this pandemic, we saw the same thing in those early months. We were talking about the export ban for masks, for example, also in Germany. But this has changed, and also the support for the European Union has increased over the last years. And also this pandemic shows that it's simply, well, of course, there is subsidiarity. Of course, there is the competence of health on the member states level, but coordinating issues more closely simply helps to solve this issue more effectively. And this is what people also see. And this is what people also bring to this increase of support to the European Union. But I think this has also other reasons. I mean, one big issue was Brexit. You all follow the news, and we all saw that the handling of Brexit also made people in the rest of Europe think a little bit more positively about the European Union than before. Even anti-EU parties in other countries in the European Union now, like the Front National party in France, and well, they renamed a little bit, but this part, Marine Le Pen party, even those parties do not wish to leave the European Union any longer, because they observed Brexit and they thought, well, that's not what people want. So I think this increasing support for the European Union, it's a slight decrease only. It's not that 90% of Europeans feel very European suddenly. That's not the case. But this slight increase in support can be explained not only with this pandemic, but it has a variety of different reasons as well.
Okay, Professor Lempp. My very final question, so to round up this discussion, do we have an input from our audience?
Yes, I want to. I have one more question. It is Didar.
Okay.
Maybe it is not correct question, but I want to tell for our speakers. Herr Lempp, how do you think how help us the pandemic to understand that the changes in health systems is today in our days is very important, that that the people must something change in this system, in healthcare system, and not only in the European Union, in Germany, in the whole world.
Yeah, it's a valid question, because this pandemic, of course, shows that having a high quality health system is good, simply because the number of people dying from this disease is lower. I mean, if in countries where the health system is not as good as it is in many European countries, the incidence of, or the probability to die from this disease is simply higher. The question remains, how much money do we want to invest in that sector? And of course, this pandemic has increased the readiness of societies to invest more in health, also even if it's costly. So I agree. This will also change the political priorities for many people. The overall issue here is that the government, the state, government involvement in many policy areas is accepted more now than it was before. So this age of this neoliberal thinking, the government is best that governs least, this period is over. It used to be, it was over already before the pandemic, but this pandemic shows that this is nonsense. It's not true that the government is best that governs least. Sometimes we need strong governments, and that pandemic was proof to this as well.
I think that's very interesting. So perhaps to follow up on this, your last statement, Professor Lempp. So maybe the last question, to round up this discussion is, and to end up our discussion as well. So you mentioned that this COVID-19 crisis was a major catalyst for the European Union to become stronger. But do you see any reverse trends inside the European Union? So because there is one opinion that I read in a report written by Chatham House, and that report had predicted that the nation states, the member states of the European Union, will become stronger. And we saw it this time. So because it was the nation states which introduced the lockdowns, knowing that this will make them highly in-debt, knowing that they violate the budget rules of the European Union, etc. So they know, and it was the nation states which introduced this, or how they provided this health care, etc., etc. I mean, in your opinion, so your prediction to end this discussion. Will we see? So what we will see? So European Union, or will the European Union embrace more solidarity or cooperation in future, or will we see the nation states having more say in the European Union in the future?
Yeah, that's also a very good question to end this discussion as well. I think we have to differentiate between two aspects here. One aspect is the public support for something like an increasing role of the European Union, and the other aspect is if competencies are transferred to the European level from the member states, then still we have different modes of handling these issues in the European Union. Sebastian called it the intergovernmental mode and the supranational mode. What we see here is that more and more topics are discussed on the European level, but what we do not see yet is that these topics are decided in a supranational way, which means that sovereignty is really transferred from the member states to the European level, because we still have the necessity to decide unanimously in many aspects when it comes to health policy. And I think this will not change so quickly. The European Union understands that, or coordinates more. There might be more cooperation among member states, but not necessarily more supranational decision-making. And I do not see at the moment a huge increase in power for the European Parliament as the body that stands for this supranational idea in Europe. What I do see is an increase in power for the rather intergovernmental bodies within the European Union, most importantly the European Council. I remember this European Council meeting some weeks ago when this 750 billion euro pact was decided. This was decided in a European institution, de facto, in the European Council. But what is the European Council? It's basically the member states. It represents the member states. So even if we say that formally the European Union gains power, within the European Union, it's rather the intergovernmental bodies and not so much the supranational bodies. However, money, budget, is also something where the European Parliament has to say yes. And with all the money that we were talking about, the 750 millions, the 7 years plan, the 1,000 millions in that 7-year multi-annual framework, this was proposed by the Commission already in May, de facto decided by the European Council, so the member states' government some weeks ago, but the European Parliament has to say yes still. And the European Parliament already said that it will not say yes to the package as it is on the table right now, because the European Parliament says we want to make sure that this topic is more closely linked to the climate issue, but even more important for the European Parliament, to human rights issues, to the rule of law issue. And that, of course, is a very difficult topic because Poland and Hungary are not really happy with this position of the European Parliament. So a quick answer to your question. I doubt whether the European Union as such will be stronger as a supranational body. But I am very sure that this pandemic made clear to everybody that topics can be handled more effectively if discussed and within the framework of the institutions provided for by the European Union. So the European Union as an intergovernmental body will be more important in the future. The European Union as a supranational body, as a federation, as a state itself, I'm a little bit more skeptical about this.
Jakob, if I may interrupt you at this point, you skipped the Commission, you skipped the EU Commission. I mean, you talked about the European Parliament and you talked about the Council, leading to your argument that the European Union remains intergovernmental, but there are several issue areas. Take the European currency policy, where the European Union is highly supranational, and where, and in other issues as well, the European Commission can sue member states if they don't stick to EU rules. So I don't, frankly speaking, share your final judgment that the European Union stays intergovernmental. If we talk about the European Union as a whole, if we talk about issue areas across the board, if we talk beyond these health issues, beyond this COVID, but the European Union as a whole has developed quite a lot towards in many issue areas towards a supranational mode of decision making.
Absolutely, Sebastian, I agree. I mean, in general, the history of the European Union is, of course, also a history of supranationalization. We see that in the increasing role of the European Parliament in many issue areas. We see it in the increasing role of qualified majority voting in the Council instead of unanimity as a decision-making mode. So we see it in many areas. But what I wanted to say here is that there is this evolution of the European Union, very obviously, but whether this pandemic will increase or the speed of this evolution in the direction into an ever closer union, as it is written down in the treaties, this is what I wanted to where I'm a little bit more skeptical about. Of course, the Commission does play an important role also in the health sector, but the decisions in the health sector are, until now, according to the treaty, predominantly intergovernmental. In other areas, it's different. That's quite clear. But in the health sector, it is like this.
Jakob, to be fair to our audience, have you got time to take one more question? Yes, it's a question from Polina Lukyanchikova about education. So it's, yes. So
yeah, in the chat,
we switched to online learning. And your question, my question is about education. A lot of people in my country worry about the future of the children because of our system isn't great. But this pandemic, we got alternative, distance learning. And unfortunately, it is not great. Some people can say that this system is worse than normal education. What do you think about it? Your personal experience, perhaps.
I answer to that question very personally. I mean, I'm a professor. My task is teaching. And I teach quite a lot. And I taught only, well, of course, I used I used Moodle and some other instruments, but the dominant mode of teaching for me was normal, standard, physical presence types of lectures and seminars. And then suddenly, and always I thought I need to invest a little bit more in in learning about e-learning, learning about distance learning. And I never did it. I simply was too lazy. And then this pandemic changed everything. It changed everything for our university. It changed quite a lot for the German Kazakh university, because everybody suddenly was forced to learn in the field of distance learning, e-learning, and so on. And I can personally say the last semester, the summer term, starting in March and ending in July, was very bad. I agree with you, because I had to teach online without knowing how to teach online. Now the winter term is better, because I learned a little bit. And if that continues, probably the next summer term will be even better. And I hope that in the end, the overall effect of this on the way how people teach and on education in general will be a positive one when we understand how to mix distance learning, online tools with of course the teaching in presence situations, with physical presence, and we merge this into a way of teaching that is better than it was before. That's my hope. And the good news for me personally as a teacher is I can observe myself learning a lot in these times, how to handle Zoom, how to teach online, and so on. But I agree, even if I look at my students, for some of them it's something very good. It works very well. For some of them it's a disaster. We lost students who suddenly didn't show up again. I taught a class in the German Kazakh University on the European Union 2 weeks ago, and it worked quite well for many. It didn't work so good for some who had problems with the Wi-Fi or with connections and so on. But the overall hope is that it's clear that this pandemic is also a catalyst for teaching all over the world.
I agree with you, Jakob. So it was I also made a very disastrous experience in the beginning, so now I'm feeling I'm becoming better. Perhaps this COVID-19 was a kind of warning to all of us, and to us professors, we have to learn new forms of education, new forms of communication. Yes, that to take a break and learn that new stuff. Yeah. So, Jakob, Professor Lempp, so it was my pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for all your answers, and thank you for your time, and I do appreciate it very much. So, just to finish this presentation with this talk, so European Union has gone through many crises in its history. So the most recent one before the COVID-19 was perhaps the financial crisis 2008, and out of all this crisis, the European Union went out ever stronger. So let's hope that this time, so after the COVID-19 is over, so the European Union will get out of this crisis ever stronger and become perhaps also another step towards more supranationality of the European Union future, so that we will see perhaps in 5 years from now we'll see the European Union more closer, or perhaps more stronger, ever closer as it is right now. So thank you very much, Professor Lempp. It was so just a quick note. So this presentation or this talk will be, or the recording of this conversation will be posted on the website of DKU. If you were not able to follow our discussion, just go to our website and upload it to your computer. So thank you to Professor Lempp. Thank you to all of you, the participants, and until the next time. So bye-bye.
Thank you, Serik, for moderating. Thank all of you for your questions and for participating in this discussion. It was an honor and a pleasure for me to be part of these German Kazakh University DKU talks again, and I hope to see you also physically next year.
Yeah. I hope yes. I did well, so because it's a very unusual experience to talk on the screen.
You did, Serik, you did.
Thank you very much.
It was a very worthwhile event, and and I think the number of participants as well. I think we were 23, 24 at some point. I think this shows how topical this issue is and how well established I think the DKU talks are. Yeah.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you. So thanks to all guys. Thanks, and until next time. So see you. See you.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Zerik and Jakob, can we stay together for 2 minutes, perhaps? Are you still there? Because Zerik and I think we thought about this as well, to have a sort of book launch